Okay, we are live with Inside Scoop with Sue. Thanks everyone for being here with us. Today is an extraordinary day. We have two guests who are generously here to talk about their personal stories around suicide. And Jason Reid is a partner at CEO International, where he coaches CEOs on how to be successful. Following the suicide of his 14-year-old son in 2019, Jason started the foundation ChooseLife.org. Jason is on a mission to educate families nationwide and help young people heal. He speaks to audiences around the country about his own experience and how parents can converse with their children about mental health to ensure that every parent in the United States knows how to talk to their kid about depression and suicide. Monique Hebert graduated from Cleveland State University in 2014 and is currently studying film and media studies at Arizona State University. She published a book about living with an anxiety disorder in 2018 called Anxiety, Anxiety, Why Do You Have a Hold on Me? She is passionate about writing about marginalized groups and bringing awareness to mental health through her work. A person of faith, Monique shares her experience with a suicide attempt while at college in the documentary Tell My Story, a documentary produced by Jason. To both of you, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your stories. Jason, can you start by telling us a little bit about Ryan and a little bit about the documentary and how you got to the name Tell My Story?
Sure, Sue. Thanks for having us both here today. It's an honor to be here. So Ryan was 14, and in fact, he just turned 14 2 weeks before he decided to do what he did. And he was, he was just a wonderful kid. Always happy, always smiling. You know, grumpy from time to time, but you know, I had 4 kids, and I thought he was the least grumpy, or at least I thought he was. Turns out he hid his depression, his anxiety from us. And it's easy to say he hid it, but the reality is I just didn't see the signs. And I didn't know what I was looking for. And I'm hoping that I can help educate other parents as to the things that I missed. Because if I didn't miss it, he might still be here. So after he passed, I was going through his room and his drawers and all. That's what you do, right? I guess you just go through stuff, looking for clues. And I opened the top dresser drawer, and there's two notes in it. One said, "Here's my username and passwords," and the other one said, "Tell my story." I took that as a message to do a documentary on Ryan's story. But it's not Ryan's story; it's everyone's story. It's Monique's story. It's all the kids that are in the movie. And we basically flew around the Western United States and talked to kids, talked to parents, talked to experts to try and uncover what's going on. And we did that, Monique, what was that, 2018?
18, yeah.
19, yeah. And then it was supposed to come out, it was 18, 19, it was supposed to come out last March, but with COVID, we didn't release it. And then we decided this March to release the movie streaming because we didn't want to wait for theaters any longer.
So I did watch the movie, and I want to say for everyone listening, it is so important for all of us to watch it. And I would say if you have kids at home, watch it with your kids, your teenage kids. So Jason, can you tell us how people can watch the movie?
Yeah, you go to tellmystoryfilm.com, and you can watch it on the Vimeo site. Or right now until June 23rd, you can watch it for free on wellbeings.org. That's wellbeings.org, which is the PBS affiliate Weta. They have a site that they just launched. It's also going to be on the Weta TV channel, and I'm not sure what PBS's Weta is. There's so many different PBS channels. It's playing on TV, I think the 26th of June, somewhere in the country. We're still involved in talking to other networks and getting it out there. It's going to be out. I mean, it'll be available streaming all the time for you. And
okay, we'll put some of the links into the comments later after we're done with our conversation, and you guys can come in and add anything if you have more information about access. Okay, so Monique, thank you, Jason. I don't want to just move on without saying that. Monique, can you tell us your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was somebody that struggled a lot with anxiety and depression in high school, but I didn't have the language around what I was struggling with. I thought I was just kind of nervous or antsy around social situations. I didn't see that it was actually an anxiety disorder because I grew up where people weren't talking about mental health conditions or just mental health awareness in general. And then I went away to college my first semester in Michigan, and I kind of thought it was just homesickness, and everybody around me thought it was homesickness as well. But I was really struggling with depression, and I lost a passion for things that I was most excited about. I had troubles sleeping. I either slept too much or slept too little. I was having trouble eating as well because going into the cafeteria at this big new school was giving me a lot of anxiety. So I was skipping meals, and I got really sick, and it kind of all came to a head when I started contemplating suicide around that fall. And what kind of snapped me out of it was what I talked about in the film was imagining what my funeral would look like, or imagining who would find me there in this storm after it kind of happened. And so that's why I was so thankful that I got to be a part of this film and a part of Jason's message to help talk to teens about suicide, because I am a prime example of somebody who didn't really have the language around what I was feeling. And if I had grown up with that, I think I would have been more able to tell people what I was really struggling with.
Do you think that there's something going on with the sound? Huh.
Oh, my sound?
I don't know whose sound it is, but if while you're not talking, how about you mute yourself and we'll see if that corrects it. And this next question I'm going to give to Monique. So when you get back on to talk, you can unmute.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so do you, in retrospect, do you think you were giving signs to people around you that were being missed? And if so, tell us what those are so that we can learn from that.
Yeah, I think there was definite signs when I was away at school. Like I said, I felt a lot of homesickness. And so I remember calling my mom and talking to my friends about how I miss home so much. And they would say like, well, how's school? And I would say things like, I just don't care about school anymore. And that was just so not Monique. I loved school, straight A student. It was kind of where I felt fulfillment at. So I think that was a sign that something was going on. And I remember in high school as well, I had so much anxiety around just being in the class or walking in the halls. And so I think a lot of teachers noticed it, but also weren't sure of like what to say or things that they could do to try to help me at that time. But I definitely think that there was signs that I was exhibiting.
And Jason, I know you've done a lot of work looking back to try to find what signs you missed. So in an effort, I think all of our goal here today is to help the next person not go through the same things that both of you went through. So, and we are so grateful that you're willing to stand up and tell your story and help us with this. But I know you did look back and think there were in fact signs. Can you share those?
There there were absolutely signs. I just didn't realize how serious they were. And he was spending a lot more time in his room, spending less time with his friends. He was grumpier from time to time. It was hard for me, not as an excuse, but Ryan had Crohn's disease, so I wasn't sure half the time. I always assumed it was his physical health, not his mental health. I was wrong. He would be snapping at his brothers or sisters more than I think he would in the past, and he was more withdrawn. I mean, it was just I didn't see it fast enough. Didn't understand what I was looking for, because as a dad that I was, I've never experienced depression or anxiety. Monique may be much better off as a parent to look for the signs, but she knows them, right? Anyone who's gone through depression, anxiety, probably they'll look at a child or a friend and they'll, you're depressed. I can see it. I didn't know what to look for, and it's interesting. I was doing a little bit. I'm looking at some of this morning. If you go through the stats, the most recent stats on Mental Health America, and there's stats all over the place, but we'll just use them. 13% of teens in 2020 experienced a depression episode, and 9% of those kids had a serious depression episode, right? And that doesn't mean that they all went and thought about suicide or attempted suicide, but that's the starting point, right? When you have that major depression episode, so 1 in 10 kids is experiencing that, and some will go to the next level, with that. Not all, but some will. And if you go with the concept I've tried to share with people, we have to own our kids' mental health the way we own our physical health. If you saw your child walking around with a massive migraine that made it so they couldn't think straight, and they were doing that on a regular basis, you would not think twice about taking them to the doctor and making sure they got the help they needed, right? Because we would do that. Well, these stats say that 10% of our kids are walking around with that massive migraine and they can't see straight, and we're not doing enough about it.
Well, one of the things is that we have this other narrative going on in terms of adolescence, that kids are ornery and they are withdrawing from us. And that is almost a rite of passage for teenagers. So when do you become alarmist and when do you kind of write it off to typical adolescence? And if let's start with Jason, but certainly Monique, if you have something to add to that, please join me.
I was going to say we should start with Monique. I mean, I'll give you my perspective on it. Sure, we all said we were grumpy, right? Growing up, kids were grumpy. I might have been. I don't think my generation was quite as grumpy as this generation, because this generation has a lot more to be grumpy about, and therefore a lot more to be worried about, right? They have access to the entire world. I did not. They're worried about global warming. They're worried about COVID. They're worried about war. They're worried about everything. And we're not talking to them enough about how to deal with those emotions. They're getting bullied on social media, online, which I never was. My bully stayed at school. I went home, right? To say that my life is the same as their life is now, it's not. Even little Monique's life was better than these kids' life is today, right? Because social media has gone that much further. The bullying has gotten that much worse. Monique, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say the same exact thing. The struggles that kids are dealing with today are so different than even when I was in high school about 10 years ago. Like, I didn't have a smartphone and, there wasn't this big onset of social media. And so having to deal with all that stuff on top of normal teenagehood is so difficult. And I was going to say also, I think there's a line between grumpiness and when it crosses over into something else. And one way that I think could be helpful for parents is to just make sure that the door is open to talk about mental health and that we're talking about it with their kids, with students as they go along, so that when they get to the kind of stage where it's like, well, I can't tell if it's grumpiness or if it's something more, that the groundwork has already been laid to start that conversation with them. And so I think just the idea of talking about mental health awareness and telling kids, young kids, that we need to check in with our minds as much as, like Jason said, our physical body, will help lay the groundwork for those kind of conversations once they're teens and young adults.
And maybe I just add on that, if you don't mind, Sue, is that when you're looking at your kids, like, everybody has a bad day, right? I'll have a grumpy day. My wife, you were really grumpy last night. I'm like, yeah, sorry, I was grumpy last night. Everybody's going to have that day, right? But when you string a bunch of those days together, that's not normal, right? That's the sign to look for. Was that a grumpy day and a smiley day the next day? Or is that 3 grumpy days in a row? Because 3 grumpy days in a row is not normal. We somehow think it's normal. We say, it's just a kid. And it's easier not to go deeper into that, but it's not normal. A grumpy day and a happy day happens all the time.
Okay, so we are trying to learn from what happened in both your lives, and you're spending a lot of time reflecting on what happened in both your lives. Do you think about, what would I have done differently? And is there instruction in that, looking back, to help us? Jason, want to start?
Sure. Yeah, there's a whole bunch I would have done differently. I would have not taken "I'm fine" as an answer. I would have dug deeper and realized that, he is depressed, he's grumpy, he's depressed, he's anxious about something. I would have taken the time to try to figure out what it was. I wouldn't have taken "I'm fine" as an answer. When someone tells you they're fine, when you tell people you're fine, you're not fine. There's no such thing as fine. Does not mean I'm great. It doesn't mean I'm good. It means I'm really crappy and I don't want to tell you. That's what it means. I'm not going to tell you the truth. When someone says I'm fine, it means they're really crappy and they're not going to tell you. So you better go deeper and you better ask them more. I didn't do that. I also showed up as the guy who had it all together, right? I owned companies. I coached CEOs. I was a black belt and Ironman, written 8 books. Everything in my life was great. My kids and my wife never saw anything that was bad in my life. I always had a smile on my face. Now, the reality is that my life, no, I almost been bankrupt 3 times. I failed at 13 companies. They didn't know any of that because my job is to show up as the father and be everything's great. So what did Ryan see as his role model? Everything's great. He looked at my life with everything. Dad's life is great. He's always smiling, always happy. Everything goes great. Everything in my life sucks. I don't want to disappoint my dad. And there must be something wrong with me. So being more vulnerable with your kids and letting them know that life is not always great. In fact, most of the time it's not great. It's how you deal with the not great stuff that matters.
I would say what I would do differently, my first year of college specifically, is I would have reached out to the counseling center that was there at the school, because that's ultimately how I started learning about anxiety and depression. As I left that school and transferred to Cleveland State in Ohio, I went to the counseling center, and that's the first time I ever talked to a therapist and the first time I ever really understood what anxiety and depression were. But in high school, I also think that it would have been nice to be able to reach out to somebody, even if it wasn't, the guidance counselor or the teacher. I think just talking to my friends would have been really helpful, because since, years past now, I've talked to them and we've been able to kind of see that they were struggling with some of the same kind of things that I was. And so if maybe I had reached out to them when I was, 14, 15, 16, we could have better navigated the waters together, or been able to go talk to our parents kind of together as a group and say that we're experiencing these kind of things. And I think that would have been really helpful.
And maybe just to add on to this is that, when you do get your kids to talk, and let me give you a tip on when you're not going to talk to them. When you barge into their room and say, hey, time to talk, they're going to yell at you until you get out of the room. And yes, you own the house, and yes, you paid for it, and blah, 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 blah. That is their only sacred space, that little room. They don't want to talk to you in that room. Right, Monique? So take them outside, take them somewhere else, find a way to get them to talk. And when they do finally talk, they do, and Monique will be able to validate this, I'm sure. They don't want you to fix them. They don't want you to tell you that, what's wrong with you? Your life is amazing. And why aren't you looking at this way? And you know what, that boyfriend or girlfriend who broke up with you, that's no big deal. Trust me. There'll be 10 others. And you're such an amazing human being. Don't worry about it. Because when you're depressed, I didn't realize this, you and I can be staring at the same blue sky. And I see a blue sky. And you only see clouds. And I'm not going to convince you those clouds aren't there. No one's going to convince you those clouds aren't there. You just have to sit and listen and make them feel comfortable. Monique, maybe you could share more about how that works.
Yeah, I this made me think of something. So I volunteer with the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Seattle, and I went around and gave presentations to different kind of parent groups. And in one of the presentations, we were talking about, well, how do I bring up the subject of talking about mental health to my kids? And somebody had said that what they did was that they started having those conversations in the car to and from school, kind of like as bookends. And it also is really helpful for the kid to talk to the parent, because you're not sitting face to face. You can look out the window, you can look at the road, so it doesn't feel as uncomfortable as like being like this. And it helped the kid be able to open up and kind of talk about how they were feeling in school. And it helped the parent be able to kind of understand that perspective. So like, kind of like Jason said, something as simple as that, as a way to talk to a kid about, the student about what's going on is really great.
And Monique, if someone said to you, hey, your life's great, you need to look at it this way, what would you have done?
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to see the blue sky. I would have just been able to see the clouds as well. You're right. It's very hard to be able to kind of change that perspective when you're kind of in that hole. Looking back on it, I can see that there was always blue sky with the clouds, but that's looking back on it. When I was in that moment, like, I definitely wouldn't have been able to say that. So I think there goes for a long way for just empathy and trying to understand and trying to kind of put yourself in your child's shoes of what they might be feeling, and definitely not making them feel like it's not valid. Validating them is going to be really important for that conversation.
Because when I shut you down and tell you that your life is great, you're likely just not going to talk to me again about it.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so I still don't know. I'm hearing a lot about what not to do. And I know, Jason, you've talked about not coming in as the fixer. Like, that's not the solution either. But I'm really not sure. So I kind of get what not to do.
Right.
If the only thing I can do actually to make a difference is to be present, that is really, really hard. Are there other things? And I know you've spoken to many kids who talk about what they wish their parents had done. So is there more than just sitting with them?
So I think you're looking for the magic feather that makes this all go away. And the magic feather is actually as simple as listening to your kids and letting them talk about it. I know it's hard. I know you're going, but they don't want to talk to me. Yeah, you've got to figure out a way, whether it's going for a walk in the car. We all know our kids, right? We all know that there's certain points in time when they're more talkative than other times. You got to find a time to get there, and then you got to ask the questions. And I wish that Monique or I, and maybe Monique's got some special way of doing this, could tell you, here's exactly how you talk to your kids. And if you use this exact word and that word and follow with that word, then you're all good. It doesn't work that way because every kid's different. Everybody looks at it a different way. It's just, you've got to find a way to get them to open up to you, to get them. And maybe it's because you're going to tell them stories about yourself growing up. And that'll work for some kids. Maybe it's just because you ask them the right way and buy them an ice cream, and that works for them. There's no magic feather. Monique, what do you think?
I think being present is huge. I think that is the number one thing. But I think there's also a ton outside, like kind of surrounding that can be done. Like I kind of said earlier, I think talking about mental health from a young age is really positive because it sets up that conversation. I also think as parents, knowing resources and knowing where to turn, because once you've had that conversation and your child has explained to you how they're feeling, the anxiety, the depression, if you don't know where to go from there, what's going to happen. So I think it's important to know the resources and know places they can go. And I'm always plugging the National Alliance of Mental Illness because they do a lot around having support groups for people. And there's always hotline numbers that they can call to connect them to find therapists. The National Suicide Hotline is another great number to have and to give to teenagers. When I would used to go around and talk to schools, I would tell the kids, like, put that number in your cell phone. Like, I always have it in my phone. So whenever I feel like I would ever need it or I need to give it to somebody else in crisis, I have it on hand. And we live in such a technological advanced world. There's no reason you shouldn't have that resource. There's also a text line for teenagers, and I can give you that information once it's over to put in the links below. But like, you don't even have to call in. You can just text how you're feeling. And so giving these resources to teens as parents is really important as well, because they can talk to you about how they're feeling, but it's great to be able to help them and provide them with resources of how they can handle this going forward.
So I think it's me, but if you guys mute, I think it reduces it. I don't know what's going on, but I just want to go to some of the comments because, for example, in response to what Monique just said, Tracy wrote, resources are too scarce. Waiting lists for therapy are, we know they're long. Testing and treatment is unacceptable. What is a parent to do? So, Monique, when you say know what your resources are, I think a lot of parents are feeling like, well, I know them, but I can't access them.
Yeah, I would agree with Tracy. I think it is the waiting list for therapists are hard. It is hard finding these resources. I know when I was growing up, a lot of these resources weren't even there. And so I think I'm grateful that they are there now, but I agree. I think there needs to be more of them. But I think there's always organizations popping up trying to find better ways to try to help parents and teens connect with resources like this. And hopefully as we move forward, there's more resources that are out there that are going to be easier for people to get to.
And tell us your number one.
My number one resource?
Yeah, you said it, but say it again.
Yeah, so I would say it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. There's usually a chapter in every city kind of across America, and they do a lot of things with like support groups and crisis lines. And like I said, the program that I was a part of, they went around to high schools and middle schools and talked about mental health conditions and just brought mental health awareness to schools. And the National Suicide Hotline is also one that I think is really important for everyone to have. Those are like my two go-tos.
And Jason?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to understand. Like, I was focusing on the very first step: how do you get your kids to talk? But once you get them to talk, and once you realize that, holy cow, my kid is actually in crisis, then it's not just about you, right? Then you've got to reach out to the suicide hotline, because there's people that are trained to talk to them, right? If you're going, holy cow, I don't know what to do right now, those people do. And then, yes, there's not enough good therapists in the country. And I wish I could say that's going to change on Wednesday. It's not. So you have to be proactive to try and find them and not give up, and find the online places that exist. And then if they don't connect with the therapist, you got to find them another therapist, because chances are they won't necessarily connect with the very first one they meet, right? I know most people don't, right? It's just how it works. There has to be that connection. So you've got to own your kids' mental health and be that advocate for them. And it's not going to be easy, and I wish I could tell you it is. If you have a child in crisis, you have a commitment to that child for a very, very long time to make sure they're going to be okay.
Okay, I'm going to read a few more of the comments. Several people say, I'm so sorry for your loss and for your experience, Monique. One mom is wearing her suicide awareness shirt right now. Her daughter is 15 and has been inpatient 2 times. We wish you well, Sharon. Denise says, our kids' mental health has been overlooked for too long. They don't just snap back. Some know how to hide it too well, which can lead to dangerous circumstances. Yes, of course. Vanessa put the link down there for where you can see the free streaming Tell My Story, which, again, I would encourage all of you to watch. It's really powerful. And Tracy says, I've had kids in the ED wait days for an inpatient bed. So that goes to the lack of resources that we have. And I guess, we'll put in there, I'm sure, Tracy, by now you know all of them. So if you have any to add in the comments, everyone please add them in, and then we'll add some more later. I want to move into, so what's changed? Because we know that, I think the statistic is that it's the second leading cause of death for young people ages 10 to 24. And that comes from National Institute of Mental Health. It seems, I think, that like social media might be a big component, that having phones with us 24/7 might be a big component. But that's just like really my own anecdotal evidence from my own family. So what do you two think about what's making the big difference here?
I think it's everything that Jason kind of outlined earlier, everything that's going on with this generation right now through the pandemic, and having social media and having everything access at your fingertips can be very stressful and be really overwhelming for kids. And so I think there has to be a way to talk about mental health surrounding technology, not just like mental health in general as well. I think that's a really important conversation to have. Jason, what would you say?
I would put it to you this way. I'm 54 this year. My 14-year-old brain was not more developed than Ryan's, and Ryan's 14-year-old brain was not more developed than mine. Yet his brain is having to deal with a lot more stuff and process a lot more stuff than my 14-year-old brain had to process. And a lot more stuff that's fear-based than I ever processed, because I never watched the news and didn't know what was going on. I was 14, living in Canada. We didn't watch the news. There was no news as far as I was concerned, right? So the stuff, the anxiety we put on these kids, the pressure to perform, the pressure to get into the right school, I never felt it. The pressure to be the best at a sport, to be able to get a scholarship. And I'm not saying parents are putting this on the kids. The kids put it on the kids too, right? They're putting it on themselves. I've got to get to the best school. Like, now you have to have a 4.4 to get into a good school, where you used to be able to get in the same school with a 3.2 when I was a kid, right? It's just like things are so much different than they used to be. And my 14-year-old brain I'm not sure how I would have dealt with it. So I don't know how these kids deal with it now. And then on top, we don't talk about it with them. We don't have the conversation with them. So yes, I get there's a shortage of therapists. But what is a good therapist? Unless you've got a psychologist, someone who's going to actually prescribe something for them. What is a good therapist? They ask questions and listen and get you to talk. And you feel better because you talk about yourself. and they give you things to think about. Every parent can be a good therapist.
Do you think that we should be monitoring our kids' devices and taking them away when they seem overwhelmed by them?
I think taking it away is a strong word. Also in 2 words. I think that always kind of like, when I hear, oh, I'm gonna take my cell phone away, even me as a 20-something, it's like, oh no. And so I know teenagers are the same way. I would say, I think it's important to provide a time where maybe there's no technology, but have it be something that they, push forward. So instead of saying, okay, on Friday night, I'm taking your phone away for 5 hours, well, Friday night, why don't we do something together as a family and we can all put our phones in this bin. And so we'll all kind of go without it just for a little while. And make it seem like it's something that's maybe self-led from them and not just a parent coming in and telling them, I'm going to take your phone away. It might be helpful. Jason, what do you think?
Well, I think it's really hypocritical to take their phone away while you're on yours. So, I mean, if you're going to do it as a family, then there was no phones at our dinner table, and dinners were 2 hours long. They just were. So there's no devices, no TV, no nothing. We would talk as a family, and that's how that part I'm proud of. Now, when it comes to, it's not about taking away their phone. It's not about punishing. Punishing someone who's depressed doesn't solve the problem, right? Why would we punish someone who's depressed or anxious? Have the conversation with them about social media, about their phones. I'll tell you what I do not think they need. I do not think a 12, 13, 14-year-old child needs a browser on their phone where they can access anything in the world they want to access. Get rid of the browser. Because the world is a scary place, and you just gave them permission at 11 o'clock or midnight or 2 in the morning to go look anywhere in the world, anything they want to look at. And candidly, guys, Ryan used that phone to research how to kill himself. Because he wrote it in his letter. If he didn't have that browser on his phone, maybe he wouldn't have done it. Maybe he would have. But I don't know how much that contributed. They don't need browsers and access the internet and access the world 24/7.
Would you advocate for monitoring your kids' devices, Jason?
I never did. To go back now and give my 12-year-old a phone, I would tell him he's borrowing mine. And it's mine. I paid for it. I have the right to look at it anytime I want to. And if I found anything you hit on it, then I'm going to punish you on it.
Okay, I'm going to go to a few more of the comments. Karen says it's a new paradigm for our teens. We as parents and therapists do need to make as much help available as possible, and governments should mind shift now. Yes. Callie says 6 months of being an advocate for my child. Can't wait to watch the movie. And Tracy makes a point that I think is really valuable. Therapists help with coping strategies, and sometimes kids are more comfortable talking to someone other than their parent. And I think in many times as a parent, having someone to outsource, whether it's an aunt or a best friend or whoever it is, it's, I know a lot of people talk about really actually identifying who's the person in your life you can go to if you don't feel comfortable going to me. Monique, you're shaking your head. Do you have something to add there?
Yeah, when I would go around to the schools and talk to the middle schoolers and high schoolers, we would always talk to them about finding those safe people that they can talk to outside of their parents. And we would have them actually write down and identify those people. And so they would have that piece of paper. And whether or not they kept it or not, I hope that a lot of them did. It was a good exercise to show them that outside of your parents, there are other safe people in your life, teachers, guidance counselors, if you're in a church group, pastors, priests, other family members, cousins, older siblings. There's so many people in your life that you can turn to if you don't want to turn to your parents or you can't for whatever reason. And I think helping kids identify that is really important. So I agree with Tracy's comment completely.
Jason, anything to add to that?
Only that, yes, you absolutely. Look, it's sometimes a lot easier for someone to talk to someone other than a parent. But it's important to understand that because you found them a therapist, you can't abdicate your responsibility to own your kid's mental health, right? You still own the mental health. The therapist is one part of owning your kid's mental health. You still own it. You need to own it.
Okay, this is a tough one because we've had a tough conversation, but I want to end with, you've both gone through so much. What in the story here makes you hopeful? Monique, you want to start?
So hopeful kind of around mental health or what? Yeah. So I would say just how open the next generation is to talking about it. When I would talk to kids that age, the fact that they would want to have that conversation with me and engage with me, I think was really important. An example of that is, so my nephew is 10 and he was having a conversation with his cousin who had just started therapy. And so who was also 10. And so his cousin just went like, oh, I was in therapy on Thursday. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And just the idea that these 10-year-old boys were like, fine with the idea that one of them or both of them were going to therapy, I thought was just so cool, because that's not something that at 10 I would have ever had a conversation. I didn't even know what therapy was. So I think that gives me hope that the next generation will be able to talk about it more, and that parents will learn ways to step up and be there for their kids and advocate for them, like Jason said.
Hopeful is really hard to look at right now. We're on the decline. We're not on the upswing. Through COVID, things got worse. We're in a mental health crisis in America like we've never been in. I'd love to say, yeah, things are getting better, and there's always those bright spots like Monique said. But in general, when you look at where we're at, we are in the worst mental health crisis we've ever been in as a country and as a world. And we have a lot of work to do to fix it. So if I'm hopeful that with people out there talking about it, with people out there sharing it, I'm hopeful that the movie makes a difference in some people's lives. I'm hoping every time we do these kind of talks and these kind of shows that someone makes a difference and has a different conversation with their kid. I'm hopeful that we're all making a difference, but understand 10% of our kids are walking around in a fog and a depression at one point or another for long periods of time last year. And like I said, you wouldn't want them walking around with a migraine. You get them to the doctor, you do something about it. We're not doing enough.
Well, I am hopeful because of the two of you and the work you're doing. And I think, everyone on this call will feel the same way, how grateful they are, and especially after they watch the movie. So Jason and Monique, thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you everyone else for joining us.
Thank you, Sue. Monique, great to see you.
Thank you. It's great being here.